Commanders at Chiefs, the board is unanimous. It's Kansas City
Yeah.
because Jaden Daniels has been ruled out. And again, I got to say this to Miss Regina Jackson, who's the mother of Jaden Daniels. Look, champ, in fairness to me, I want to make it very clear. I respect Miss Regina Jackson. She has done a fantastic job as far as with Jaden Daniels. Champ and I, we've defended her on our pod because a lot of people felt that she was being too involved in Jaden Daniels' life. But at the same time, hey, that's her mom. That's his mom. Mom's just looking out for him. Even though sometimes I feel like she needs to let Jaden do his own thing, but we can understand where she's coming from. But I do have a problem with her response about getting on people when it comes to the Jaden Daniels RG3 comparisons because Jaden Daniels, he's had injuries so far this season. The sprained knee injury in which he suffered week 2 against the Green Bay Packers. And then last week against the Dallas Cowboys, he had a hamstring and was ruled out for the game. I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, but the comparisons are fair. Because again, champ, what was my main concern and skepticism about Jaden Daniels?
His size, durability.
And again, this is the reason why I said I would have gone with Drake May with that draft. Now, Drake May, and to his credit, Drake May has played well enough to be in the conversations for the MVP. And right now, New England, hold on, we thought it was Buffalo running away with that AFC East division. Doesn't look like it that way because not just with Drake May's play, you look at Mike Vrabel as the head coach, who's done a good enough job. Tennessee made a mistake by letting him out the door.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Miss Virginia and Miss Jackson, it's about the play with Jaden Daniels. My concern, my main skepticism with Jaden Daniels was his size. I felt like he was too skinny, considering the fact that we had Robert Griffin III. Coming out of college, he was known for being skinny. And yes, there are the comparisons, the similarities are pretty fair. Both were drafted with the number 2 overall pick. Both were Heisman Trophy winners. Both were sensational during their rookie seasons. But as their careers went on, they've regressed. Now, Jaden Daniels' injuries are not as severe as RG3's injuries, but the injuries are starting to pile up. And because of his size, that was my major concern with Jaden Daniels. Again, I'm afraid if Washington does not do its part to protect him, sadly for Washington, that this will be just as painful, more painful than for us to move on from RG3 because we finally found a quarterback of this caliber that we believe that can take us to the promised land. And now because of all these injuries, we're going to have to start back from scratch. If we're not careful with Jaden Daniels, champ, if he continues to pile up injuries, I'm afraid, is he going to be the next Burrow or the next Andrew Luck?
I hope not. And those comparisons are fair. But at the same time, they didn't do a good job. I know they went and made some moves on the offensive line.
They did with Laramie Tunsil. They drafted Josh Connolly, and they've done their part of trying to help out Jaden Daniels. People want to take the easy route by saying sophomore slump. But at the same time, we're just only talking about football, Ms. Jackson. The similarities are pretty fair if you actually look at it.
It's fair, but at the same time, is it really? Let's just
Yes.
be honest about it.
Yes,
Because
Chip.
no,
Chip,
because
I
Michael
told.
Vick had the same problems in Atlanta. There was time that Michael Vick didn't even practice. He had leg injuries. He had rib injuries. He was a running quarterback. He had just as many injuries.
But
So
what was it? It's not because of the running, champ. It's what did I tell you about Jaden Daniels' size? My
yeah,
concern was he's a skinny quarterback. I already dealt with RG3, who's a skinny quarterback. I would have gone with Drake May because Drake May is bigger. He's not like Josh Allen, that type of big, but at the same time, he's bigger enough to handle that type of punishment compared to Jaden Daniels, and he's a good enough talent. That was my concern, my skepticism with Jaden Daniels from day one. Never his talent or production. My concern was his size.
yeah. But the thing is, Mike Vick went through that same thing, that same process. There was times where Mike Vick he couldn't practice when he was in Atlanta. These are just minor injuries. These are not these super injuries that, broken arm, broken leg, torn ACL, things of that nature. Plus, he has an organization that's very, very capable at this point, and he doesn't have to worry about these coaches like Jay Gruden, who is going to mess up his career.
Well, that's because
So
of Dan Snyder. Obviously, with the new ownership, I'm not concerned about that as much. But champ, them injuries, even though they're minor, they're piling up.
yeah, it's only his second year though. Like I said, the same thing used to happen with Michael Vick when he was down south when he was in Atlanta. He dealt with a lot of injuries. He was out for a game or two when he was, when he didn't break, the year before he broke his leg. There was a lot of speculation on whether he was durable. Leading up to that Green Bay game, there was a lot of speculation on if he was going to start in that game, considering how cold that it was when we went to Lambeau Field and upset Brett Favre and beat them for the first time in Lambeau Field in a playoff game. Mike Vick went through the same thing. Is it fair? Not necessarily. I think people are so short-sighted. A lot of times with running quarterbacks, especially when you have one that doesn't have the size and the girth that Jaden Daniels lacks at this point, a lot of times people are going to get scared and say, oh man, here we go again. But the thing is, this is his second year. A lot of running quarterbacks have those injuries. Remember, Lamar Jackson had those injuries. Michael Vick had those injuries. Josh Allen had injuries. There was a lot of running quarterbacks who are just as dynamic, if not more dynamic, who had those injuries at a certain point. Like I stated, I point to Michael Vick as a prime example because I remember reading in the paper. Back then we read newspapers, by the way. I remember reading in the newspaper on how he didn't practice. I remember watching on the local news on how he didn't practice a certain week because he was so sore and beat up from certain games. And you know how he had to sit out one game, and then Doug Johnson had to come in order to do some things. Lamar Jackson, he had the hamstring injury. Matter of fact, he had one early. Matter of fact, he just now coming back from the injury this year. He just now coming back. So when you have a dynamic quarterback like that, it's unfair to compare him to the first guy as far as RG3 is concerned, because a lot of running quarterback has those same type of injuries and they're able to come back. I really think that now he's taking a lot more punishment because he's really being asked to do more. He's being asked to do more. Teams are keying in on him. Teams are seeing what he is capable, has seen what he's capable of. So they're trying to take the fact of how dynamic that he is out of the game, and they're attacking him and going on the attack a hell of a lot more. But we've seen injuries, especially during sophomore seasons. We've seen it with these running quarterbacks a lot. We've seen it all before. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the next RG3. Like I stated, Lamar and Vic are the prime examples of we've seen these injuries before. We saw these injuries with Randall Cunningham before because he was a dynamic running back or dynamic quarterback. We see this all the time. So I understand the frustration that he has because we've seen this before with these dynamic quarterbacks. I don't necessarily want to be compared to the first tragic figure that we've seen in Washington, that being RG3, because guess what? A lot of these other quarterbacks, especially the reigning, you know, the guy who was supposed to win the MVP this year, he suffered a hamstring injury. There's been a lot of injuries with dynamic quarterbacks like that. So
But here's the thing, champ. With Jaden Daniels, yes, Lamar, obviously, but Michael Vick. But here's the thing where I disagree with you, Michael Vick. Michael Vick coming out of VTech wasn't that type of passer the way Jaden Daniels was. And yes, to your credit, yes, Washington is in a different situation and different circumstances with the new ownership compared to the past ownership with Dan Snyder and Jay Gruden. And yes, also RG3 is at fault. Because again, it was reported that he wanted to change his offense and he wanted to be a pocket passer like Peyton Manning. But at the same time, champ, he is a skinny dude. One hit, it doesn't even matter. Even that hit against the Dallas Cowboys, hamstring injury. And of course, he has a sprained knee. And again, although they're minor injuries, champ, if them injuries continue to pile, you're going to ask yourself, okay, if these injuries continue to pile, are we going to at some point sit him out for the rest of the season? Because I'm wondering, This is something that we're going to have to do if I'm Washington, because if God forbid, if I put him back on that football field, it may not be another minor injury. It may be something worse. And that is my biggest fear, because he's going to have to go back and do all that rehab and stuff. I still believe in Jaden Daniels, champ. Don't get it twisted. I do believe in Jaden Daniels' ability and his upside. But again, the comparisons are fair because of the size, not just because of the playing style, the size. He is a skinny dude. Again, Kyler, what were the skepticisms, the criticisms of Kyler Murray, other than the fact of his immaturity? His size.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm concerned if he doesn't build up in weight, he gonna get hurt. And again, you always say quarterback not throw behind his back. Washington, they've done their part of trying to give him some offensive line help. Yes, he's asked to do a lot more work, and it's not entirely all on him. Look, Terry McLaurin. We expected Terry McLaurin to regress, considering the fact that he was holding out, obviously, for a new contract. And look, Debo and other players have been injured as well. But the comparisons are somewhat fair. Not just the fact that they were number 2 overall picks, Heisman Trophy winners, but still in all, the size. That's the main concern I had with Jaden Daniels. I believe if I had Drake May, now again, I could be wrong. Drake May could have injuries, but who's more likelihood to have an injury, Drake May or Jaden Daniels?
Jaden Daniels. Like I said, I agree with you on a lot of what you're saying. But like I said, I keep comparing him to Vic because Vic didn't necessarily have the ideal weight and the height of a prototypical quarterback.
But he was
Remember,
more prone to injury compared to Jaden, given his playing style.
exactly. He was more prone to injury. Remember the second year of him as a starter, remember he broke his leg in preseason. He broke his leg in preseason, and he was able to come back and have one of his greatest seasons the very next year. Then the year after that, set the record for most yards by a quarterback. So that's how come I keep comparing him to Vic, because we've seen the dynamic quarterback that didn't have the ideal size be able to get injured and then come back. I really think that there's a lot of things that needs to be done about the offensive line. They've done their best to try to get some extra protection, but I wouldn't compare him to. I don't blame her for saying that. Like, damn, don't jinx it. Don't jinx it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm not saying don't jinx it, but at the same time, don't summarily dismiss it. They are somewhat legitimate. They are somewhat fair.
Yeah.
We can't. Two things can be true. No, it can be true.
Yeah, two things can be true, but like I said,
I'm being nice to Miss Jackson, because again, I actually like her. Again, I'm not saying he's going to end up being RG3, but again, champ, I gotta say it. My main concern, you got to give me credit on this. I've been consistent and adamant about it with Jaden Daniels. Never his sound or play, his size.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid. I sometimes am afraid if he gets sacked, if he gets hit, I'm covering my eyes, champ. That's how bad it is for me. And yes, I understand with Vic and Lamar, because they were able to suffer injuries and they were able to bounce back. But at the same time, if you're Washington, you got to be very careful, because it's been more than a decade. You finally found a quarterback, a true legit quarterback. I mean, after RG3, you dealt with Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith, who also suffered a catastrophic leg injury.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You had to deal with Mark Sanchez. You had to deal with, unfortunately, rest his soul, Dwayne Haskins. And you've dealt with a laundry list of QBs. And I'm afraid, and I hope that's not the case with Jaden Daniels. Because if that happens, unfortunately for me, champ, and Washington, we have to go back from scratch and wait for another decade or so to get a quarterback, because quarterbacks of that type of caliber, you don't wait for a year or two. They don't normally come out like that.
Only once in a generation, man. Once in a lifetime.
Look, champ. I understand you want me to be have grace, but at the same time, I do think it is fair though to point out those types of comparisons, because unfortunately for Washington fans, it is a major concern. Maybe I'm just being emotional, champ, because again, I am a Commanders fan, and it's been a lot for me to stomach over the past decade or so.
I feel you on that. That's valid. It's very, very valid.
Because again, we haven't had a quarterback of this type of caliber before. I mean, honestly, when have we really had a legit quarterback since Doug Williams, who was the first black one to win a Super Bowl? I mean,
Yeah, Mark
we
Brunell for a couple years.
yes,
Mark Rippon. Mark Rippon was Super
Jason
Bowl
Campbell,
MVP.
yeah, Mark Rippon, but we also had Jason
Jason
Campbell for a
Campbell.
little bit.
You haven't had that constant, but yeah, it hasn't been constant since I'd say since Mark Brunell. Mark Brunell has had some good years up there, man. But yeah, I understand everything you're saying, man. But I mean, I always try, especially when you have an exciting quarterback like that. I always try my best to be optimistic about everything because guess what? Like I stated, when Vic was down here in Atlanta, he got hurt. He was constantly getting hurt. There was constantly every time you looked around, it was like questionable, questionable, questionable. On the injury report, you start getting a little bit scared, and then lo and behold, next year he broke his leg, and then the year after that, he came out there and it was just lights out. Went all the way to the NFC Championship, but it's always hope against hope, man. That sophomore year, I would say probably always the worst year, man. Teams are kind of figuring you out. You're trying to figure out how to outsmart it. Defensive coordinator scheming for you now. And it's not necessarily the offense has figured you out. It's, they're scheming for you now. They're scheming about ways to stop you now. They're
Which is
putting
why I want Cliff Kingsbury to call more snaps under the center as opposed to the shotgun.
Yeah. So they're scheming for you now. They're trying to neutralize your legs. They're trying to neutralize that big arm that we know you got. They're trying to neutralize all of that. They're running safeties high and a QB spot all at the same time. They're doing all of that. So yeah, that sophomore year is always the most horrible because teams are now scheming for you based on what they're seeing, what they're seeing on film from last year, and they're trying to figure out everything at this point. So yeah, sophomore year is always, depending on who you are, the roughest year because teams are starting to figure you out and scheme for you a lot more. They're starting to scheme for you a lot more.
Well, again, I just hope that Washington is smart with it. If Washington ends up going 3-6, 3-8 this season, then would you consider benching Daniels out for the remainder of the season?
Absolutely. Sit down. I said the same thing. Look, I said the same thing for Lamar. Like if they played another game and it's too far to week, sit down.
Thank
Sit
you.
down. You ain't look. There's not much you can do here. We're not gonna go to the playoff. We're not gonna win a championship at this point. Sit down. Now, if they
Good.
able to come back and do some great things, then power to you. Because we saw something like that almost happen last year with Joe Burrow. But if you get to a point where it's just so out of reach, I'm not going to do this just to put butts in these seats. I'm trying to protect long-term investment and long-term Super Bowl aspirations. Sit down. So yeah, if it starts getting bad, it's time for you to sit down.
Well, look at the next three games that the Commanders have. They got the Chiefs Monday Night Football. They have a Sunday Night Football game at against the Seattle Seahawks. Then after that, they have the Lions. Then they have the Dolphins. Okay, you can beat the Dolphins. But then 2 weeks after the Dolphins, you face the Broncos. You go on the road to Minneapolis. You go on the road to the Giants. You have the Eagles. You have the Cowboys. And then you have the Eagles. So that schedule is pretty scary, though, if you are Washington.
Scary, scarier than Halloween.
So, hey. But look, again, just to be clear, everyone, I do believe in Jaden Daniels' talent and his ability. Again, my concern about him from day one was his size, never his talent. So I want to get that straightened on the record.